New video is going to be about musical dissonance. Please write below how you would define dissonance.
Crunchy.
Edgy.
When the maths sound bad.
Two notes that don't share very many overtones.
The good stuff.
Wanting to plug my ears or escape.
Passion.
Fuzzy sonic vibration feeling.
Anticipation of resolution.
Unstable and conflicting sound
Harmonic
interval.
tension.
When the sound is a little bit yucky.
Spicy interaction of frequencies. Will make the listener uncomfortable. People say they don't like waves that are not unresolved. Really bad out of context, really good in context.
That sounds.
Viewers of this channel are a pretty sophisticated bunch, musically speaking, and many have a pretty high tolerance or even love of dissonance. But the past 100 years has been a pretty weird time for music and its relationship to dissonance, where the more experimental musicians have pushed to ever greater extremes into pure noise and beyond, and where even Hollywood films end up using some pretty extreme dissonance for dramatic purposes. At the same time, the wider culture seems to have a pretty negative attitude towards dissonance. The word is basically used as a synonym for ugly, unpleasant, harsh. And I wonder sometimes if it all started with this guy. Not Professor Frink of The Simpsons, but composer Arnold Schoenberg. Like Professor Frink, Schoenberg was a character who was both a great inventor and a great meddler. He really didn't like leaving things as they were.
Yeah.
You could say it was part of his creative drive. I mean, look, here's something he invented. He thought two-player chess was just too boring, so he invented a four-player version, which actually sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
Plain old chairs, also boring. Let's make them chairs that can turn into ladders, why not?
Yeah.
And when it came to music, Schoenberg thought tonality had had its day, and what we needed was a whole new system that he called the 12-tone method. His idea was to fundamentally rethink the way we approach musical dissonance.
Yeah.
But he took a weirdly justice-orientated approach to it. He talked about liberating or emancipating the dissonance. Sort of a black notes matter guy, I guess. Actually, more.
All notes matter.
Schoenberg imagined a future where people would be whistling his atonal melodies in the street, but somehow that never happened. The crowds never really flocked to Schoenberg's music. He dragged dissonance into the harsh light of day and made it take centre stage, and the public on the whole wasn't so happy. They saw dissonant music as something that must be endured rather than enjoyed. The connection was formed in their mind between dissonance and, well, music they didn't really want to hear.
The burglar trips the alarm, the house raises from its foundations and runs down the street and around the corner to safety. Well, the real humans won't burn quite so fast in there.
Schoenberg, or at least 12-tone composition Schoenberg, has always been a bit of a bogeyman for me. He represented the start of a period where composers really lost touch with the audience. But I've been thinking a lot about dissonance recently, and despite my reservations, I've started to realise that, unlike Professor Frink, there was a method in Schoenberg's madness. And maybe, just maybe, emancipating that dissonance wasn't such a bad idea after all. Dissonance has been a massive part of Western music for hundreds and hundreds of years, and for the most part it's been an expressive tool. In Monteverdi's Pur ti miro from the opera L'Incoronazione di Poppaea, the two lovers are entwined melodically in a sensual duet. I embrace you, I enchain you, no more grieving, no more dying. Poppaea's B is followed by Nero's C natural, a semitone or half step away. It's one of the earliest examples of a supremely expressive use of dissonance, the intimate closeness of the notes suggestive of their physical connection, dissonance as sexual tension. J.S. Bach uses dissonance to create a different kind of expressivity in his gorgeous cantata BWV 54, Widerstehe doch der Sünde, perhaps suggesting the pain of resisting sin. Every strong beat in this opening passage has a punchy dissonance. Here, here, and here. But the result is heart-achingly beautiful. And this form of dissonance remained a mainstay of the composer's expressive toolbox for the next 200 years. Here's Mahler in his famous Adagietto from the Fifth Symphony from 1902. Notes are forever landing a step away from the chord beneath. Notice that we take almost as much pleasure in the dissonance as the resolution. We do kind of want the resolution, but it's the gentle pain of the dissonance itself which is the point. So this is one view of dissonance, and it's set up by the movement of individual voices, or voice leading. A voice moves out of sync with the chord beneath. Sometimes it's held over from the previous chord, sometimes it's preempting the chord to come. And the displaced note causes a clash with the chord beneath. But it's a dissonance that demands a resolution. There's a tension the dissonance causes, and that tension demands release. The push and pull of tension is what creates the emotion in the music. But there was another kind of dissonance, which towards the time of Schoenberg was taking stronger hold. You can see it clearest in the work of Debussy. In a work like La Mer, a great symphonic ode to the sea, dissonance is used in an impressionistic way. The purpose is to express moods or pictures. Debussy was using dissonances which didn't need to resolve because they were atmospheric. If your dissonant chord depicted the crash of a wave, there was no point trying to resolve it to anything, it just was. You might hear the clashing dissonances rolling on top of each other like waves more clearly in this piano duet reduction. But I keep mentioning dissonance as if it's clear what we're talking about. The more time you spend thinking about dissonance, the more you realise it's a word that's used to describe quite a diverse range of phenomena. We've already seen the variety of suggestions some of you offered up on Twitter and Instagram. It's quite a diverse range of definitions. The German composer and music theorist Paul Hindemith in the 1940s said that the two concepts of consonance and dissonance had never been completely explained, and for 1,000 years the definitions have varied. And if anything, the dictionary definitions just add to the confusion.
A lack of harmony among musical notes.
A mingling of sounds that strike the ear harshly.
A combination of sounds or musical notes that are not pleasant when heard together.
They all seem to be saying dissonance is something bad, wrong, to be avoided, whereas, as in the examples we've seen, it's responsible for some of the most gorgeous emotional high points in all of music. And apart from that, it all just seems so subjective, right? I mean, who's to say what's not pleasant or harsh? Surely there must be some kind of scientific basis to this stuff. I think it's time to talk about sound waves. There are a number of physical characteristics of sound waves that could be candidates for what makes a sound consonant/dissonant, pleasant/harsh, tense/relaxed. Firstly, there's the harmonic series itself. This guy. The harmonic series is a natural phenomenon in, for example, the human voice itself, but also in the vibrating strings or columns of air found in most instruments, where a fundamental note produces a series of overtones or harmonics. Normally, of course, they all blend together and you hear them as one note, but if we use a frequency filter on the computer, you can hear the individual harmonics separately. Each of these overtones sits in a precise mathematical relationship to the fundamental. So if this is the fundamental tone, the first harmonic is exactly half the wavelength. The next is a third, then a quarter, and so on. The fact these different wavelengths all intersect quickly means there's a periodic repetition to the waveform. These kind of waves are said to have periodicity or harmonicity.
Wow, that's a lot of cities.
Just highlighting the first few of these harmonics, you can straight away see that they form a major chord. So this is one argument for saying why major chords sound pleasing. It fits very nicely as a theory with the major chord itself. But as soon as you move beyond that, the arguments become a little more stretched in my view. For example, the 18th century composer and theorist Jean-Philippe Rameau suggested that it was the ratios that mattered. So between the notes of the series, you could see 1 to 2, which is an octave, 2 to 3, a perfect fifth, 3 to 4, a perfect fourth, 4 to 5, a major third, and 5 to 6, a minor third. So his argument was that most of the common intervals of music can be found in the harmonic series, apart from the ones that can't. 6 to 7 in the harmonic series includes the out-of-tune flat 7th, so Rameau ignores that, but he does accept 4 to 7, which gives him a minor 7th. So there was a slight case of confirmation bias. He was looking for justification for particular notes, and he ends up riding a little roughshod over logical consistency. And perhaps most fatally of all, despite searching for it all his life, he never managed to find a justification for the minor chord in the harmonic series. And to be fair, nor did anyone else after him. But many theorists and composers continued using the harmonic series as the basis for their theories. Professor Frink himself suggested that intervals that were higher up the harmonic series were less familiar and so more difficult for us to comprehend, which in his mind equaled more dissonant. I mean, don't get me wrong, there definitely is some connection. Harmonic periodic notes, more pleasing, more consonant. Apart from anything else, these kind of harmonic notes just feel familiar because our own voices produce them. Our voices produce notes that have that harmonic series built into them, and that's not true of all sounds. Most natural sounds, such as those generated by forces like wind moving water or the movements of predators or prey, have little or no periodicity. When periodic sounds do occur in nature, they are almost always sound signals produced by animals for social communication. So could we be hardwired to find these kind of sounds more interesting, more pleasing, more consonant, with other wilder, weirder sounds being more scary, dangerous and dissonant?
Yeah, well, possibly.
Possibly, a little, but it's definitely only part of the puzzle, definitely not the whole puzzle. Another area we can look at is what happens when two notes play together. This is the sound of two notes, two simple sine waves. It may not sound like that, but that's because the two notes are at the same frequency. Their sine waves match, and our ears can only detect one note as a result. But watch what happens when I gradually increase the frequency or raise the pitch of one of the notes. The sound goes on a kind of journey. First, as I raise the note, we hear a beating sound. This is the noise that piano tuners listen out for when they're tuning a piano, and it's caused by the two waves interfering with each other, adding and subtracting to the overall sound wave. Raise the pitch more and the beating gets faster and faster, until we enter a kind of sound you might call rough, a dirty, scrapey kind of sound. The beating and the roughness are two areas also thought to relate to our perception of dissonance. The beating you heard there was from two pure sine waves, but remember most musical notes are harmonic, so they have all of those overtones. And now imagine all of those harmonics clashing when two notes are very close together. There are multiple levels of overlapping beating going on. And there's a second, less well-known effect known as masking, where some of those upper partials block or prevent you from hearing partials in the other note. That's thought to be partially responsible for what makes the sound feel rough and dirty. Partially responsible. So it's all pretty straightforward, right? Close together sounds, clashy and dissonant, and sounds with harmonicity, pleasing and consonant. So if you want to write some good music, stick to mostly consonant and avoid the dissonant. Simple. The end. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Except, of course, that's not how music works. When you actually look at the different kinds of music around the world and their relationship to dissonance, there's a huge variety. Some set out quite deliberately to cultivate that clashing, so-called harsh sound. The Egyptian mijwiz is an example. The two pipes of the instrument are tuned a tiny bit apart specifically to create this buzzing sound. So the buzz is actively encouraged, it's sought out as a feature, not a bug. And you could say the same about the clashing intervals found in various singing styles, like the singing known as ganga, which comes from the mountain regions of Bosnia. These are both quite intense sounds, but the clashing sound of nearby notes is also something that's sought out in far more peaceful music, in the tuning of the Indian tampura, for example. Or even in the English church organ, where it's known as the celestial or angelic voice.
What's usually called the voix céleste. Sometimes it's called vox angelica. You don't want to use this stop on its own, because of course it's out of tune. And when you listen to it on its own, it's out of tune. Listen to the solicital on its own. But if you combine them together, the solicital and the voix celeste, you get this wonderful undulating effect.
Detuned stops are literally supposed to make it sound more angelic, so go figure. These examples are so counterintuitive that I expect some of you will struggle to take it in, so let me just repeat. Clashing intervals do not, by themselves, make for ugly, tense, dissonant music. In some music, they're actively sought out as a form of beauty. But what about periodicity? Because it's such a key part of the natural physics of sound, you would think that we could all agree that notes whose sound waves are mathematically aligned must sound better. Well, apparently not. This study from Nature looked at the relatively uncontacted tribe, the Chimane, from the Bolivian Amazon, and it found that although the tribe did classify those close together buzzy sounds as unpleasant, when it came to harmonicity in intervals, they didn't make any distinction in the pleasantness of the sound between intervals that have high harmonicity, like say a perfect fifth, versus say a tritone which has much lower harmonicity. They literally felt no difference in the sense of consonance or dissonance between the two. But interestingly, the same wasn't true of a nearby population who had been much more exposed to the wider culture of Western music. So what does this all tell us? It tells us that whilst there are several bases on which you might consider something consonant or dissonant, there are none that are universally agreed upon. People's sense of dissonance varies from culture to culture. Most of the world today is surrounded by what I'm loosely calling Western music, where close intervals are thought of as dissonant and harmonic intervals like the fifth are considered consonant. But the science shows us that none of this is innate, it's all culturally learned. And this is where I started to see that Schoenberg had a point. There's no reason in and of itself that music shouldn't have more dissonance. There's nothing more natural about the tonal system just because it has a lot of major chords in it, however much Rameau and countless others have tried to claim it so. Gamelan music is entirely built on the non-harmonic sounds of gongs and other metal instruments. Are we really going to say that that music is somehow less natural? And by inference less good? I certainly hope not. You can't just stick to nature for your sense of what's right and wrong in music, otherwise the harmonic series would be the most exciting music you could hear. I may not be such a fan of Schoenberg's 12-tone music, and I'm definitely not a fan of how it shaped the musical discourse over most of the 20th century, but dissonance itself is not the culprit here. You may already love all of Schoenberg's music, in which case I say, good for you, my work here is done. As it happens, I do personally love works like Erwartung and Pierrot Lunaire, still very dissonant but not yet 12-tone works. But even if you don't like his music, at least try to appreciate the many doors that Schoenberg opened up. He intuited correctly that the world of music is much larger than the guardians of tonality would have had us believe, and dissonant sounds are a vital part of that vast landscape. Dissonance can be many, many things: exciting, scary, electrifying, but also, as we've seen, gorgeous, moving, even soothing. There is no correct or natural amount of it, just as there is no inherently right or wrong way to use it. Nature has given us these sounds to play with. What we do with them is up to us and our imagination. And when it comes to imagination, the best thing you can do for it, I would argue, is to keep an open mind. But then, as sophisticated viewers of this channel, I know that's something you don't have a problem with.
Bruce.